We've been talking about heart attacks for the last few weeks. Today we're going to end this series talking about things that attack our heart. If you've not been with us, maybe this is your first Sunday or the first Sunday in a long time, we talk about things that attack our heart. And we've talked about fear. We've talked about a poor self-esteem. We've talked about unforgiveness. We talked about the deceptiveness of the heart and how hard it is sometimes to see these things that attack our heart. And you say, Pastor, I don't really feel like I relate to the whole fear thing or the unforgiveness or maybe the low self-esteem thing. But what I want to share with you today, the last thing I think all of us in this room can really relate to. In fact, what I have shared with you in this whole series on heart attacks are my problems. And I've just shared with you just to be really vulnerable, transparent with you, the things that I struggle with, and maybe you struggle with some of them as well. So for the last 4 weeks, we've been talking about my problems, all right? And we're going to finish talking about one of my problems today. But I think it's not just my problem, it's your problem too. And this thing that attacks our heart would be, in fact, I think they talk about heart disease being the silent killer. And this thing today really is, it's a silent killer for all of us. It's dangerous because we can't see it. And when it begins to attack our hearts, we don't know that it's attacking our hearts. We don't know that it's attacking our hearts until it's too late. Ironically, while we can't see it attacking our hearts, we can spot it in an instant in somebody else. We can see it immediately. We don't know when it attacks. This thing that attacks our heart, we don't know when it attacks us. We don't know when it has affected or infected our heart until it becomes attacked. And this attack is so subtle. It begins with such innocence. We're lulled into a sense of security, and we think everything is okay. But we really got a heart problem because there's been an attack on our heart. And this thing that all of us in this room deal with, this attack on our heart, pride. And pride is hard to define. Pride is hard to define because if you're a parent today, you're proud of your child. Your child makes some great achievement out on the sports field or academically, and we're so proud. It's like, I'm so proud of you. We'll even use that word. I'm so proud of you. And we should be prideful or proud of our children in their accomplishments. But when your child is the best child, when nobody measures up to your child, when suddenly your child is above reproach, when your child is above correction, when your child doesn't have to obey the rules like the rest of the class, when you defend your child to the teacher because you're pretty sure that your child cannot and will not make a mistake in the class, that's the kind of pride that is toxic. It's a stench. We have pride in our work. We should be proud of our work. That at the end of the day, we can look at our accomplishments and we feel good about what we did today. But then somewhere along the line, we begin to think, you know what? If I wasn't here, who would do my job? Nobody works like you do they? Some of you take pride in your health. You run, you jog, you exercise, you eat right, you take great care of your body. And you're proud of the way you look. You're proud of your accomplishments for losing the weight. And you feel pretty good about yourself. But then the longer you work hard to look this way, you begin to look at other people. And anything less than your standard is a pig or a slob, undisciplined in their physical appearance. At some point, God made some huge impact on your life. He delivered you from addictions. He delivered you from drugs or alcohol, and He got you out of all these relationships, and He dramatically changed you. And for a time, you celebrate this. You're so thankful that you grew up in a home where mom and dad were together and they didn't fight. But the longer you serve God, you kind of take a dim view on anybody who doesn't believe like you or live like you. You see, pride is so much about image management. Pride, if you notice the word pride, if you kind of visualize it in your mind, pride has I in the middle. How am I going to appear to other people? How will I look to them? What kind of an image do I want to present to other people? I don't want to be corrected by anybody else because I'm pretty sure I don't need correction. Oh, people can correct me, but when they correct me, I know the emotions I feel on the inside. And I want people to have a certain image of me when they see me. This morning when I have my iPad open, this is my third Sunday now. I've gone paperless in my sermon preparation. And if you could come up here and see the size of the text in my sermon notes, but I'm not going to let you see it. Do you know why? Because even though I'm visually impaired, I want to appear as normal as the rest of you. I don't want you to see my weakness. I don't want you to know that I have this problem. And so I'm very guarded with who can see what's before my eyes today. In fact, I don't want you to notice that one eye dangles to the side a little bit, this lazy eye that I have. I don't want you to notice that. Because I want to appear as normal as the rest of people. So I want to look like all of you. I want my car to always be clean because I don't want you to think that I'm a dirty slob at home. I want your impression of me to be a good impression. You go to a wedding, you go to a funeral, nobody wants to drive an old, dirty car. When you have people into your house, you know what you want the home to look like because you think the home is a reflection of you. And not to mention that you have 4, 5, 6, 8 children that seem to help challenge your pride. It's about image management. And you know how to do this well. Because you come to church on Sunday morning. Oh, we've learned this. If you're a regular church attender, we're so good at image management. We know how to put on our game face. We know how to make it look as if our family has no problems. There's no conflict, even though maybe we're second, third, fourth generation church people. We know how to put on the game face to make it look like on the outside, everything is great. We're good at this. But you need to understand that pride makes fakes of all of us. Humility makes us a real person. Pride is a stench in the nostrils of God. It's the product of our rotten and rotting flesh that all of us deal with. Pride is the CEO of hell itself. It offers no room for God to speak to our hearts. It offers no room for God to change us, affect us, or impact us. Because when we have so much pride, we are uncorrectable. Because we don't need correction. It makes us liars. All of us liars. Fakes. I came up with a test to see if you have a problem with pride. And if you want to take notes, you can take notes. But it's a pretty simple test. In fact, you can do this today before you leave the church. You go into the bathroom. You look in the mirror. You still don't have a pride problem, but you're not done with the test yet. You lean as close as you possibly can to the mirror. and you breathe. And if there's a fog on the mirror, you have a pride problem, okay? Jesus in Luke chapter 18 is talking on the subject of prayer. He tells a series of parables from chapter 17 into 18, and they all deal with prayer. And Jesus now tells a story that brings us intimately into the lives of a couple of people in Luke chapter 18. Jesus tells a story that allows us to enter into the story and look into a mirror. When we read this parable, it should cause us to look into that mirror. Jesus wanted to drive a point home, and he says this in Luke chapter 18, verse number 9. He told this story to some, probably to somebody else, but not to us. Some who had great confidence in their own righteousness, and they scorned everyone else. He doesn't identify who the some are. He just kind of leaves it open. Jesus, this master, brilliant communicator. He doesn't name names. He just says, I'm going to tell you a story. Doesn't identify who the person in the story might be. It's just about anyone. And already we're on the subject of pride. And some of you might be tempted to think, it's really too bad they aren't here because this sermon is for them. Which should be an indicator that this sermon is for you. And this story that Jesus is about to tell is just about two people. People on opposite extremes of the culture of Jesus' day. Here's what he says in the next verse. Two men went to the temple to pray. In fact, they went up to the temple to pray. The temple's on a mount. It's on a hill, and they went up there. And if you wanted to really follow through as the Jews did, you prayed at 9 in the morning, and you prayed again at noon, and you prayed again at 3 p.m. And so they head to the temple, and he kind of gives us some details now about who was there. The rest of the verse says this, that one is a Pharisee. The other was a despised tax collector. Jesus tells the story contrasting two people of the culture that were at polar opposite extremes in the culture of Jesus' day. And the moment his hearers would hear this, it would evoke emotion on the inside of them. The Pharisee. People, you say the word Pharisee in Jesus' day, certain thoughts and emotions came to your mind. You said the word tax collector, well, that evoked a whole other kind of emotion. We don't identify with Pharisee and tax collector in our day. But Jesus could have said it this way. One day, two guys went up to the temple to pray. One was a black man and one was a white man. One believed that drinking a little alcohol was okay. The other one thought that you should never drink any kind of alcohol. One person was so disciplined in the way they took care of their physical body. The other one was an absolute slob. One person was a hard worker and made their way in life. The other person was a welfare recipient. Jesus would tell a story to evoke that kind of emotion. In the story when Jesus talks about a Pharisee, guys, you'd like your daughter to marry a Pharisee. He was a moral man. He had a great reputation in the community. He followed the rules. He would have had her home by 10 p.m., held the door for her, would have provided a place for her to live. He had status in the community. The Pharisee was a pretty well-liked guy. And then you had the tax collector. Jesus talked a lot about tax collectors. We've talked about them here. They were hated. In fact, they were hated so much they had their own category. When Jesus ate, he would sometimes eat with sinners and tax collectors. I mean, that's how hated they were. You've heard me talk about them enough that, they would buy their right from Rome to go collect taxes from the Jews. They were known as being crooked, extortionists, evil, dishonest. Everybody hated tax collectors. And Jesus now brings us into the prayers of these men. Verse 11, he says, the Pharisee, he stood by himself when he prayed his prayer. The language seems to indicate that the Pharisee got as close as he possibly could to the place inside the temple where the priests would do their ministry. He got as close as he possibly could to the front of the church. And he stands there so that he can be noticed by everybody. The crowd gathers in the court. They're in the temple that day. And the Pharisee, he gets up as close as he can to the front. And look at his prayer, the rest of that verse. I thank you, God, that I'm not like the rest of people. I'm not a cheater. I'm not a sinner. I'm not an adulterer. And for sure, I'm not like that tax collector back there in the back of the room. Interesting prayer, isn't it? It's a very interesting prayer. It starts out as a prayer of thanks to God. But there's no thanks in the prayer. And all the Pharisee does is enumerate all the things that cannot be seen on the exterior, but he might be very guilty of them in his thought life, in his private life. The same kinds of things that you and I might be guilty of. The Pharisee was all about image management. He had a great reputation in the community, and he certainly wasn't going to change that when he came to the temple to pray that day. He was telling all the things that he was telling God all about what he had made of himself. But he forgot to think about the things that God needed to make of himself. He talks about what could be seen. He's not done praying yet. Verse number 12, he says, God, I just want to remind you something. I fast twice a week. I give you 1/10 of my income. Obviously, this is a church person. The Pharisees were only required to fast one time a year. That was on the Day of Atonement. The Pharisees, historically, when you read about them, though, they fasted on Tuesdays and on Thursdays. Because on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that was the busiest day in the city. People came from the countryside into the marketplace. It's the busiest time. And then they would wear old, raggy kind of clothing, and they would powder their face white to look sullen and gaunt and sad. If we're going to fast, let's really make sure people know that we fast. Because I have an image I want to portray to people, that I am so devout and I give so much and I've sacrificed so much in my life, and I'm so pious. And it was all about image management. You know about image management, don't you? Sure you do, because you and I thought about it before we came to church today. You'll think about it before you go to work tomorrow. Students are thinking about it before they go back to school this fall. When it came to appearance and image management, the Pharisee, he headed down to a science and an art. See, the sinister of pride is that the longer we are exposed to church and church culture, the sinister of pride is this, that the longer we are exposed to the grace of God, the longer we are exposed to the atmosphere of the church in which we worship, the better we are at this. And the world, unfortunately, around us on the outside of the walls of the church, they know it. And to them, it stinks. You might be tempted to say, as I was when you read this, and this is where Jesus is so brilliant in telling the story. The Pharisee comes in, announces himself, and all self-righteous and pointing to all his good qualities. And you read that, and Jesus draws us in so brilliantly to get us to think these thoughts. At least I did. God, I thank you that I'm not like that self-righteous Pharisee. And the moment I say that, I just exposed my pride. Jesus talks about the other guy that came that day. Tax collector. Tax collector. Verse 13. Tax collector, he stood at a distance. He knew that if this place in the temple represented the presence of God, he knew that he didn't deserve to be there. He wanted to be in the temple, in the presence of God, but as far away as he could possibly be from it. He didn't even dare lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, with his head bowed, he begins to beat his chest in sorrow. Oh God, be merciful to me, for I'm a sinner. Isn't it ironic that the Pharisee stands there and points out to God, I'm pretty sure I'm not a sinner. I'm pretty sure that my life is right because I know how to do things right. I know how to make things look right. I'm pretty sure I'm not a sinner, but that tax collector, that's exactly what he is. One man was trying to cover for himself. The other man comes and uncovers himself. One man was a fake, and the other man was as real and authentic as they come. One man saw no need for God's mercy. I'm above the law. I obey the law. And the other man realized that he needed all of God's mercy. And Jesus then kind of wraps up the story. The conclusion is this, verse 14. I'll tell you this sinner, not the Pharisee. The sinner, not the Pharisee, he went home justified before God. The people listening to Jesus tell the story for the first time would have been scratching their heads a little bit. Like I thought the Pharisee, I thought that's the way we're supposed to do stuff. I mean, he's religious, he knows the scriptures, I mean, he obeys the laws. I mean, I kind of thought that's what we were aiming for. I mean, if anybody's going to be justified before God, it's got to be a Pharisee. How could the tax collector go home justified? Jesus, before they could even ask the question, answers that question. In the rest of that verse, he says, "For." Here's the explanation. Here's why the justification came. Those who exalt themselves, well, they're going to be humbled. But people who humble themselves, they get exalted. You and I we've probably experienced one of these more than we've experienced the other. Because about the moment we get all bowed up and think that we're God's gift to whomever, the church, the job site, humanity, our family, somebody catches us with our zipper down. Just making sure. Somebody says something. Somebody does something that reminds you that you are not all it. And all of us have been humbled. And probably not many of us have been exalted because we are humbled, because we're so consumed with exalting ourselves and can only be humbled. Two men in this story. And when you read the story, immediately you love one guy and you despise the other. I don't know about you, but I want to be like the guy that I love in this story. To recognize that we need God's mercy because of our pride. The more pride we have, this is the ironic part about this, the more pride we have, the more we despise the proud. Pride paints a bullseye right on our back. And God's aiming at it. Do you know why? Because when we're full of pride, we're empty of God. When we're full of pride, we are unteachable, unyielding. Pride says, I don't need to change. Don't you tell me what to do. Come on, all of us have our strengths. And we know our strengths. Oh, come on. Washing the car. And you're out washing the car. And you take pride in the way you wash a car. And about that time, somebody pulls up just to be neighborly and talk to you for a little bit. And they watch you while you chamois your car dry. You wring out your chamois and you're pretty sure you're done. And they say, you missed a spot. You want to smack them. Hurt your pride. Oh, you are the finest cook in the whole county, and everybody knows it. Got the preacher over for Sunday. Chicken dinner, mashed potatoes. You watch that preacher to see what he eats and how he eats it, and he takes a big bite of your mashed potato. I mean, your mashed potatoes have won blue ribbons. You see the look on his face as he bites into a lump. I can't go on with stories, but you understand the sentiment. That when we have pride, we are above the law. Nobody can tell us how to live our lives. We're above the rules. Our children are above the rules. And I'll tell the teacher how to teach their class because I think I know best. And I'll tell the police officer how to do his job. I'll tell my boss how to do their job. I don't need to go to the altar. These steps up here we call an altar. I don't need to go there. That's for sinning people. I want to go to the altar. Sometimes I feel called to the altar. Oh, I beckon God. How I beg God to be intimate and close with Him. But if I go to the steps, what are the people going to think? I've taught Sunday school in this church. I've led youth ministry in this church. I've sang in the worship team in this church. I've given the impression in my image management that everything is great and I am so godly and good, but I'm dying on the inside. But I can't go up there and bend a knee. What will people think? Pride is a paved highway to the portals of hell itself. So how do we be a humble person? See, pride is self-serving. Pride just thinks about I, that I in the middle of pride. Isn't it interesting that the word sin and pride both have I right in the middle? Yeah. But humility is always looking to serve others. I would just say, church, don't stand up to be recognized, kneel to serve. And while you're kneeling, beg God for mercy. Because you and I need it to deal with that filthy, dirty stench of pride that attacks all our hearts.